Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the end of week 2. We are now halfway through the course, which is probably a bit of a shock when it registers with you that we're halfway through the term. We've got 4 weeks, and then we've got the culminating activity week after that. You're going to be having an exam. I'll be giving you more details about that, but to just give you sort of a general sense of what your exam is going to look like. It's going to be a series of quizzes that are going to unlock and lock on D2L. So you'll be able to do the exam from home. No need to come in and to write it formally in a school or anything. Be nice and comfortable. You could do that from the cottage or whatever. Just make sure you've got a good internet connection for that day, and I'll be posting that. That'll be when we finalize the details. It's in the 5th week, and right now I have it scheduled for August the 1st. That may change, I'm not sure. So, presentations. Today you've been assigned a presentation to do, which it's piggybacking off of lesson 4, and that's going to be kind of the way that I do things with this course to kind of make it a bit easier, to lessen the workload a bit. And I mean a bit, right? Like, it does have to be a fairly rigorous course because it is college preparation. But rather than having you do a presentation about a new topic, I'm having you do it about a topic that you've already covered in lesson 4. So you're going to be doing an analysis kind of presentation on the horror movie of your choice, which is what you were doing in lesson 4. You're doing that, in writing, and now you're going to be doing that in speaking. So, the first thing I'm going to do right now is I'm going to try to get into speaking mode, which is getting rid of my ums and uhs, which I know I have lots of them. I'm just shooting kind of from the hip with these videos. Sometimes I write down what I'm going to talk about. Today I'm not really going to, because I only have this to talk about and one other thing that's coming next. But I'm going to do my best to slow down. And by slowing down, I'm not going to have to use ums and uhs. Those things tend to pop into your speaking when you're trying to fill empty space, but you don't have to fill empty space when you're delivering a presentation. And actually, if you take little pauses now and again, it's a sign of confidence, or at least that's how it comes across to the audience. And that's kind of the theme of what I'm going to be talking about today with regards to presentations, is how to deliver a presentation with confidence. So I want you to think back to a time in school where you stood up in front of a group of people and you had really no idea about the topic that you were covering. Like, you had a cursory idea, you had a general knowledge of it, but you really didn't understand it. And so maybe you had a bunch of PowerPoint slideshows that you read off of. Or maybe you had a big sheet of paper that you put in front of your face and you read off of. Or maybe you tried to memorize what you were going to say, just like back in elementary school public speaking, which traumatizes most kids, I think. And it probably didn't go very well. That presentation probably went poorly, and then you walk away from that presentation with the idea that you can't do presentations, and then you carry that idea forward with you throughout school. And I'm going to guess that most of you probably don't think you can do presentations well, but you definitely can if you understand what a presentation really is. A presentation is not a speech that you have to memorize and deliver in your classroom, and then if it's good enough, you get to go to the gym, and then if it's good enough, you get to go to another school or to the Legion or something like that. That's not what a presentation really is. And actually, I want you to try to, I want you to try to unlearn what you learned from elementary public speaking. That's not what I want you to do at all. Instead, presentations are very simple. I want you to think of a topic that you know a lot about. It could be anything at all. For me, it could probably be the game of chess, or it could be the Beatles, or right now it probably could be fishing. I don't know a lot about fishing, but we're into fishing right now. That's the phase that my family is into. And so the learning curve had been pretty steep. I could talk about it for 5 minutes, though. I know enough about it that I could talk about it as best as I understand. But I'd probably stay away from that topic and go to something that I know a lot about, So, for example, the game of hockey, which I grew up and I played for like 10 or 12 years or something like that. I could talk a lot about the game of hockey, and I wouldn't have to memorize anything. I wouldn't have to write out my whole speech ahead of time. I'd want to organize it so that my ideas came out, in a logical order. So if I started off by talking about the rules of the game, and then I switched to like, my favorite players of all time, I don't want to go back to like a rule that is really important, but I forgot to mention, like offside or something like that. So I'd want to have things organized, but I know the topic really well, so I could just talk about it. That is how you deliver a presentation. And so my example from the beginning of this spiel about you standing in front of the group and not knowing what you were talking about, the problem wasn't your presentation skills. The problem was your lack of knowledge if you were ever in that situation. So here is my method for delivering presentations, for preparing them, and it's what I teach all of my students, and the results are really good. We've had in our high school, if we go back maybe 8 years ago to when we really started to try to put some emphasis on the college prep stream, we've had some huge gains in the field of presentation delivery. We've gone from having students reading presentations to now the norm is students don't read at all. They get up and they do what we call stand and deliver. So here's what you're going to do. Number one, you're going to spend half of the time that you're going to take just learning about your topic, just understanding it as best as you can, which means you're going to start with, whatever you know about it right now. And then you're going to have to go out and find out more probably to fill in the gaps of what you don't know, or to extend your knowledge if you don't know a lot about the topic. Now, if you're choosing a horror movie that you've already watched like a bunch of times, if you've got a favorite horror movie, then you probably have a lot to talk about already. And so you can kind of move on to step two. Once you have what I call the solid foundation of knowledge, which means I know this topic really well and I can talk about it for the amount of time given. So this is a 5-minute presentation. When I'm confident that I could talk about this topic for 5 minutes, then I'm ready to move on to part two, which is sorting and organizing the information. The best place to be is in a place where you know too much about a topic. That's a really good place to be, because then you can sort out, what do I want to talk about? What do I not want to talk about? Like, what's the audience going to find interesting? What's going to bore them? Or what are the most important things to talk about? What's not as important? In the case of this presentation, think about like what we've talked about in this unit. So you might want to talk about horror archetypes, and you might want to talk about how the film fits like the genre of horror. Of course, the main thing is your analysis already. And if you've done that analysis, if you've gone through the movie and you've looked at how that movie fits the different genres of horror and the cinematography of the movie with camera angles and with lighting techniques and how the movie satisfies the psychological needs of the viewer, if you experience the catharsis at the end of it or whatever, if you've already done that and you've gone through and you have this information, you're pretty good to go. And that's what you're going to focus on. Those are the things that you want to include because they're related to the topic. And of course, that's something else. You always want to stay on topic. And then the other thing you want to do is to organize the information. So you're going to figure out, like, what do you want to talk about first? So the analysis, the brainstorming table that you were encouraged to do, it has things in like a certain order, and that order is a pretty good one, but maybe you want to change that order. Maybe you decide that you want to talk about how it met the psychological needs of the viewer right off the bat instead of having that at the end. Or maybe you want to talk about cinematography first, or maybe you want to put that at the very end. You probably want to have the two categories of cinematography together because they're related, so it would make sense to talk about one and then the other, not talk about lighting techniques and then go on to archetypes and genres and then go back to camera angles. That wouldn't make as much sense, right? So you want to organize things and just put them in order, first, second, third, until you get to the end. Now, once you've figured out what you're going to be presenting on and you understand your presentation, the information really well, then you just transfer that onto cue cards and you're pretty much good to go. Now, in the class notes, I've given you examples of what cue cards look like. Have a look at them. The cue cards are just that. They're not like bite-sized versions of the big sheet you're going to read off of. And you're never ever going to read your presentation. You're going to speak to the audience. You just need to know what you're going to talk about next. So what you do on the cue card is you make little points about, what's the next thing I'm going to talk about for the next 20 seconds. And it could be longer than that, of course. But the idea is if you talk about a particular topic for 20 seconds and there's 3 topics on a cue card, then that's 1 minute worth of presentation. And so if you have a 5-minute presentation to do, if you have 5 or 6 cue cards, you've probably got your presentation right there. So once your presentation is onto cue cards, then you just practice delivering it. And this is the difference between your elementary school public speech and a formal presentation, is there's no memorizing involved at all. It's you talking to the audience. And here's the big difference. That elementary school public speech is the exact same every time, but this presentation will be slightly different every time you do it because you're talking. Just like if you were telling the story about what you did on the weekend and you told it to a friend and then later on the day you saw another friend, you told the same story, the story would be different a little bit. This speech is going to be a bit different. The presentation is going to be a bit different. And it's going to be great because it's going to be you talking to the audience. And so you're going to just by default get all of the things that you need in a good presentation. You're going to get the eye contact. You're going to get the fluid delivery. You're going to get the tone of voice and the cadence and pace, and the feeling of confidence that comes with speaking as opposed to reading. Nobody looks confident when they're reading. But if you can talk to the audience for 5 minutes about a topic, even if you're dying on the inside from nerves, I mean, you're doing this into a camera this time, so it's not that big of a deal. But if you're in front of, a college class of 50 students, you might be dying on the inside, but everybody's going to think that you've got it under control because you're going to look confident. So that's the 4 steps that I teach to putting together a presentation. So get that solid foundation of knowledge. I mean, invest a lot of time there because once you know what you're talking about, the rest just falls into place. Sort and organize the ideas that you are going to talk about from the ones that you're not. Put them in a good order. Put those onto cue cards and then practice, practice, practice. All right, so this presentation gets delivered the same way as before. I want it uncut, so you just speak into the camera from the beginning to the end. Obviously, if you mess it up, you could start all over and I'm never going to know. But to me, that's all right because you will get better at delivering this presentation every time. And I'm going to want to see that you are talking to me as opposed to reading to me. All right. I believe I just had that one in there, which is pretty good. Do your best to limit those. Be conscious of those. And as we go through the course, hopefully those will get fewer and fewer as you go on. All right, so with that, you're off to work and I'll be looking for those presentations to come in. Oh, the last thing I want to talk about is at this point, you probably want to know how you're doing in the course. I'm going to be calculating marks and getting those out to you by email fairly soon, so you'll be able to see exactly how you're doing. And I'm running short on time, I'm up to 14 minutes now. But when I send out the emails, I'll have an explanation, but I'll also in my next video talk a little bit about how I'm grading you and exactly where your mark comes from, because I think that's important for you to know. All right, have a good weekend and best of luck with that presentation.